See, there's some sort of family resemblance.
It was a lovely opportunity to do a very, very subtle makeup that I think very successfully transformed that actor.
No one's ever going to recognize me.
We proceeded to give me a big sort of prosthetic nose, and I got to experience what the dwarves experience on a daily basis.
Oh, dear God, this is weird.
What do you think? He's freaking out.
Oh, Christ.
Sit forward and have a look.
Oh my God, it's so weird.
Okay.
Okay. It's not your nose. It's fine.
What do you think?
Oh, I don't know. So let me put the wig on.
Oh, that's right. There we are. Just pull yours over slightly. Put it down a bit, yeah.
Feeding into that ish.
I've got a fake nose, fake moustache, fake beard, fake wrinkles, fake hair.
And eyebrows.
But the eyes are real.
It was the weirdest thing. It was like looking at my dad. It was very, very weird.
We had a brief from Peter that he is of a lordly stature and he's, a military man. And we already had the Soldiers of Dale from the prologue in the first movie. So I had to tie into that world in some ways.
Some of the initial concepts, we were told that he was going to, he needed to look like a leader of men. It was in the middle of the attack, so he was going to be armoured. They were inspired by Persian armour. There was something very distinctive around the sleeves, the way they flared out, and it was a soft armour.
It came down between two. One was a lot more related to the Dale soldiers, and one was a lot more more lordly.
It's too kind of prissy and sort of, you know what I mean? It just needs to be a much more of a cool kind of a thing.
And ultimately went for one that played him down a little bit more and made him feel like the everyman commander.
I'm loving my fat belly, my fat suit.
Did they bulk you?
Yeah. Oh, come on. Come on.
No, I'm saying...
Don't give me that shit. Insults are flying today. So, Girion, he's going to try and attempt to shoot Smaug from this fantastic contraption here, which shoots one very long black arrow, which are here. This is the black arrow that Bard finds a few hundred years later.
Every single thing you see on the screen doesn't get there by chance. It's all been ummed and ahed and prodded and tweaked and tested and ripped apart and restitched, and that's what happened even for a character as small as Girion in the film. He went through the whole process just for one day, which amazes me. But this is what when you're seeing this film, you see the care and detail that's been taken for everything, which is lovely.
I loved Lake Town, and so I'm already quite emotionally invested in that place and the characters. So the destruction of that in kind of weird way, I'm looking forward to seeing that because I know that that's going to be pretty moving.
Lake Town's one of my favourite places, actually, in the movie. It was in the book, and then I thoroughly enjoyed doing it in reality.
It's such a privilege being part of a marvellous machine like this because it's so good-natured and it's just really, really good place to be.
One of the special occasions for me was to go onto set when Stephen Fry was being farewelled, essentially, and they'd be given a little gift.
We would like to present you with... Oh, my God, thank you so much. You'll be back in the ginger comb over before too long, don't worry.
I'll be naturally even fatter and balder than I am. Thank you anyway. Bless you all. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
One of the joys of this movie was the ability to move into wild, new territory that we as filmmakers hadn't actually explored before. Whereas the first movie, we were revisiting, Hobbiton and Bag End, we were revisiting Rivendell. There is nothing reprised in this movie. We are dropping into an adventure that is now stepping into literally uncharted territory.
Starting with Beorn's
And under the eaves of Mirkwood and then beyond to the north and the east is the area that Tolkien called the Wilderland. It's wild, but it's also bewildering. I think it's a very lovely play on words on Tolkien's part, is that whole notion of not knowing where you are, where you're going, is contained in that word.
When you're in Wilderland, you may be bewildered entirely literally. You don't know where you are. You've lost your bearings. You don't know what to do. You now need a real compass, but you also perhaps need a kind of moral compass.
This is all new territory we haven't seen in either the first Hobbit film or in The Lord of the Rings. So it's pretty exciting to be able to explore some new areas and still keep it within Middle-earth.
You do feel a little bit like you're on a sort of archaeological expedition to some degree, sort of, heading into the deepest, darkest backwaters of uncharted places. It's kind of fun.
The way that Tolkien introduces us to Beorn is quite beautiful.
They soon came to a wooden gate, high and broad, beyond which they could see gardens and a cluster of low wooden buildings, some thatched and made of unshaped logs. Barns, stables, sheds, and a long, low wooden house.
Once you enter through the front gate into Beorn's property, it's almost entering kind of a magical, otherworldly place.
I found Beorn's house absolutely mesmerizing. It's one of my favorite parts of the book, and I think that's one of the sets that will be remembered.
Tolkien really described Beorn's pretty well, and we used, wherever possible, as much as possible, we used his descriptions as a guide to what we were doing. I mean, the great big thorn hedge, the beehives all over the roof of the house.
The look of it looked like, for me, something almost from like Hansel and Gretel or something quite magical.
Beorn's house is one of the most magnificent sets I've seen and worked in. It's fantastic.
Beorn's house was a lovely design project. We designed many Beorn's houses. Beorn is this powerful, towering figure straight out of Norse myth. And it was important to reflect that in some way in his house.
Beorn's hall is interesting not just because of the description, but because Tolkien actually illustrated it as well. And looking at the illustration, the picture that Tolkien drew of it is very similar to a picture that had appeared in a book on Old Norse literature by his friend E.V. Gordon, which is parallel in Old English tradition to Herod, the hall of King Hrothgar, that is menaced by Grendel in the story of Beowulf.
But unfortunately, Herod was also the model for the Palace of Rohan in Edoras in Lord of the Rings.
You read what Tolkien described, he really is describing pretty much what we built for Theoden's Golden Hall. Having done that, earlier with Rohan, I wanted Beorn's to be different. Retaining the essence of what Tolkien described with all this wood and timber and size and space was the first, exercise.
So we started with a much simpler A-frame kind of house with beams coming out of the ground.
And then worked on some ideas which were kind of typical sort of hall, very much kind of a Viking mead hall.
Eventually, Alan designed a house which was going to be built in Strathterry, so it incorporated those wonderful big rocks that are all over that landscape.
You could sort of make it work for the landscape quite well, couldn't you?
You could.
I think that big rock could be part of the house, couldn't it?
Yeah. It sort of makes it more of a cave type.
That you could do anything, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he was a bear, thought there would be kind of a cave on the inside. So you go from a very kind of semi-civilized environment into something that's much more like a den at the back.
Alan did several lovely designs. Then the location changed. Moved to Paradise, near Queenstown. So the whole design started again from scratch.
Then it became a farmhouse, much more kind of conventional looking.
So with Beorn's, the basic idea was He's a vegetarian, he loves honey, he has animals that live in his house.
It was quite typical of medieval times to have a house that housed both the human family and their animals.
A little bit like a Devon longhouse. You'd have the animals on one side and living quarters on the other.
I love the idea that one end of the room you've got stables, horses and cattle tied up, and literally, you know, at the other end you've got the breakfast table and a kitchen. I kind of thought that was kind of cool.
So we decided to go for something that had kind of primitive aspects to it, but it was very much built on a kind of traditional farmhouse, and we ended up making a model of that.
These are beehives on the roof, because Bjorn's a bit of a alternative lifestyler, and he's a vegetarian, and a bit of moss on the roof to look like a turf roof.
One of the great advantages with Bayon's set was we were building it in paradise, and paradise is green grass and beech trees and, you know, views as far as you can see.
That's the art department that painted that. It's not real at all.
Every shot here is gorgeous.
How can it fail? With us in the foreground.
Seeing mountains there, beautiful forest here, and yeah, in the midst of this was the exterior of Bayon's house, which was huge.
There were several different pieces. We had the exterior of Bayon's gateway, which is when they first discover that he's chasing them, and they go in through the gate and into the front door of the house. That was a standalone piece. And then we had the back door to Bayon's house, which is where they come out in the morning to introduce themselves to him, and he's chopping his firewood in the backyard. One of the reasons we built Bayon's house, where we built it, was there was a beautiful, big 200-year-old beech tree. And this tree rose up. It was very, very cool.
And that tree, that big tree there, could just be in the corner of his house, sort of thing.
Well, it could.
Yeah, we had a bit of a drama. We had this huge windstorm that came through Paradise.
Our guys had just arrived on the site to finish building the set, and the tree had been blown over. The tree had come down in the night. So, this tree coming down right in the middle of everything.
Thankfully, it didn't blow onto the set. That would have been quite disastrous.
There was about 20 tonne of broken, rotten old tree right in the middle of our set. We're looking at building a tree, putting it in the same position right here, and taking it straight up, 8 metres. We could take it past the top of the roof. Part of Peter's brief was, this is the spot, here's the tree, it's perfect. So we built an 8 metre tall beech tree.
Yeah, it's a rather crazy situation, and now we have to build another one. Because it's so high up, we're trying to work out ways to try and save time. So we're making a lot of these at ground level, and then basically once we're ready to place them up there, then we'll place up here. We sort of named her Betty. We like to keep all our tree names to a female name. They seem to sort of somehow blend its way there. We're at the stage now of hopefully finishing off the carving in the next hour or two, and then we're going to start applying all the bark techniques. This is Betty, and this is the replacement red beech tree, which was there. It was close to 9 metres high. It probably came close to 2 or 3 tonnes.
We had people coming in doing the final bits of preparation before the shoot, and they had no idea it was a fake tree. So they were working all around it, and it wasn't until later that we told them, no, this is the second tree.
So it wasn't a real tree? It looked real. I swear to God, that was a real tree. I had no idea. That's how good they are.
We chopped up the original tree into firewood, and that was used as dressing in the set.
I remember seeing the set that they built, which just looked like it belonged there. It's kind of a shame that it wasn't built permanently because it looked so beautiful.
I mean, good grief. You imagine how many people would come and visit this. It's extraordinary.
The exterior of Bayon's had to look like it was part of the environment. So it was very important we kept the rock, the timber work, the thatching, all in the tones and the colour tones of what exists there already at Paradise in the beech forest.
We decided that he makes everything from local materials, and the local materials were beech timber and riverstone.
In order to make it as realistic as possible, we have to make sure that the colours blend into the rest of the environment so it doesn't stick out very much. We want it to, you know, look quite natural and quite nestled into the environment.
One of the things to marry this structure into its environment was to use earth on the roof to actually give him a growing roof.
It seemed to me that turf was an ideal material, and once again is a very strong reference to the whole Norse culture. Viking houses often had turf roofs, and it just seemed like a natural choice for someone like Beorn.
I'm enchanted. I think it's great. It looks really, yeah, it can be very striking.
We wanted Beorn's house to feel like it was something built by someone of superhuman strength.
Beorn built his home himself, all by hand.
This is a man who stands 8 feet tall and is immensely strong. So he can build with gigantic stones and, you know, huge trunks of trees. And the idea was that the house has basically been built, and then every opening has been carved through the wood.
He had the muscles to carve through these big timbers.
Beorn's massive. He's like way bigger than Gandalf, and Gandalf is huge to us. So, I mean, it had to be a big scale place.
So if you're 6 foot, he's 8 foot, so he's 2 foot taller than you.
Beorn's 8 foot tall, dwarves are 4'6", so it's like 1.85 to 1 for an actor dwarf.
The difference between him and the hobbits and dwarves is massive, you know, so we really needed to sell the size there of how big Beorn is.
I look back to some of our exterior Beorn's set photos, and you wouldn't know it was huge. We got these marvellous photographs, but they don't illustrate the enormity of everything in the photo. There's no way to illustrate really his scale unless you went and put a member of the crew or a cast member into the environment.
From a distance, the house looks quite normal. It looks like a normal scale house. But if you're to approach it, so as Alan walks in, he's actually shrinking in size till he becomes half the size he was by the time he's in the front door. It's quite a curious phenomenon.
There's nothing like a scaled-up set to make a character lose his status. I mean, when you want to look like a child, you can forget any sense of kingship.
Cheers! I remember sitting in the rocking chair.
Look at the size of it.
This enormous rocking chair. I mean, it was weird enough to sit in, but if you saw anybody else sitting in it, like I remember looking at Adam sitting with an enormous beer mug in a massive chair, and it totally convinces you that you are actually looking at a tiny person in a normal-sized chair. It's very strange how your mind reacts to it.
Welcome to Tinyland.
Welcome to the world of big people.
Everything was huge. It just felt like you were suddenly in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. It was brilliant.
The dwarves coming into this area, it's like being a 3-year-old in an adult world.
It's about time I'll have one of Beorn's fine brews. Ooh, yeah.
Our set dressers usually go to great lengths to kind of get into character, and we'd managed to chop out a good portion of this wood carving using a dwarven scale mallet and chisel, which of course for Beorn would be just regular old mallet and chisel. Beorn, as a solo operator, he entertained himself with paying homage to all his animals by carving. I think that kind of explains the character the most, and that he's a protector and a friend of the animals.
Yeah, and we tried to suggest the fact that he's a changeling in a sense. He can change from man to bear. That's been depicted in a way in that. So all of these things are kind of a sign language that if you can read the language, you realize quite instinctively that he's not just an ordinary human. He can do all these things. So it was a lot of work for the sculptors because every piece is different. The key word to describe the exterior of Beorn's would be rough-hewn, unsophisticated, and quite brute in a way. I mean, very much like his character.
All right, so we're at Beorn's head chair. So the brief is always to have two contrasts of the inside and the outside of the hedge. The outside of the hedge, which is sort of towards the evil sort of part of the land, really, we've tried to make quite sort of gnarly and quite twisted and quite wild. We added quite a few thorns to the branches, and it just make it a lot more wild look, so not so much foliage. The inside, we're just trying to sell the whole contrast from outside once again. We've added a bit of colour, we've added a bit of artificial leaf. I'm trying to get the bit of colour to try and sweeten up the sort of look in a way.
Bjorn's obviously an avid gardener, and all of this pasture land out the front is harrowed and planted for Bjorn to feed his animals.
Everything with Bjorn is obviously scaled up, so the veggie gardens were rather large for your normal household veggie garden.
These are Bjorn cucumbers.
I don't know where they come up with this stuff. Huge, huge fruits and tomatoes and pumpkins like this.
Quite a few of the larger veggies we got from the locals in Glenorchy. There's quite a variety here, as you can see. And we've got some pretty flowers to attract the bees, because it's got lots of bees, so you need lots of flowers.
This is Bjorn's front porch, and as we know, all bees love their honey. Bjorn keeps some special bees.
He's big on bees.
He's big on bees.
And the bees are big as well.
He's big on big bees. Yeah.
As we would go into his sort of porch bit, and you look around, there's like 50 beehives.
And this is the front door, which later on will have a digital extension at the back of it, and we will see the interior of Bjorn's house, which will be shot back in the studio in Wellington.
So this is Bjorn's. I don't know if anyone's home, but we'll soon see. Looks like the landlord's out. This is Bjorn's home. He had a huge amount of pleasure building.
Beautiful wooden structure, massive bits of timber, intricate carvings, big front door furniture, massive kind of... I was going to say massive knockers. There's just no escape from it for me. It's just pathetic. It's ridiculous, but it did have massive knockers.
Right, cutting, thing two.
This is peculiar.
Thing three.
The inside and outside were designed at the same time and built 4 or 5 months apart.
We built the interior of Bjorn's house in the studio, and that was a standalone, full interior.
The things that you see here are the rafters that are in the top part of Bjorn's house. The guys in the mould department have made these giant rockers, wood graining rockers, for us, so we have been able to control the size of the wood grain that we want on the rafters. So this is a really quick and economical way to do fake wood.
Bjorn's into wood carving. He's into embellishing his home with his unique cultural signature.
He's a very talented sculptor. He's a very talented guy for the chisel.
He's an artist. He probably started out with a very plain house, and he's sort of whittled it away and sort of kept on. I suppose in a few years afterwards, in The Hobbit, he would have just kept going, and the house would eventually collapse because he would have just go too far, and he'd carve one post too many, and it would all collapse on him. Probably, hopefully not. Hopefully that doesn't happen.
I sort of imagined that Bjorn would carve motifs and symbols into his house.
John did a huge amount of work on the actual designs of Bjorn's house.
I ended up doing sketches for each window, sketches for the door into the kitchen.
John House spent quite a few evenings drawing these elaborate wood carvings, which were beautiful, and it just automatically created an aesthetic language for Bjorn's house.
I surrounded myself by examples of Viking carving and decoration.
So I was very, very keen to put in specific references to Norse myth, because Bjorn is very much a character that's come to us through Tolkien directly from that mythology. That explains the presence of Yggdrasil, the world tree. Hugin and Munin are the two ravens, thought and memory, who are Odin's companions. They bring him news. And Nidhogger is the devouring worm that gnaws relentlessly on the roots of Yggdrasil and will one day bring it down in ruin at Ragnarok.
Bjorn's was one of our busiest sculpting sets.
Bloody hell, we did some carving in there.
It was done by the fabrication department. We have a carving division.
And we had this extraordinary team of sculptors who took the drawings and actually sculpted them in this absolutely colossal scale.
Our indigenous people, the Maori, have a history of intricate carving, and it's one of the things that we were able to use inside Bayon's house.
If I had to describe Bayon's, I would say it would be a marae built by Vikings in the Pacific Northwest. And there's no two carvings alike in that set. Everything is different. So each piece had to be designed, drawn out, blown up, full scale, and carved.
What we start off with would be our basic one-to-ones, which this is a breakdown of the larger one-to-one printouts. Placed onto the polystyrene, traced through, and from there comes the entertaining part of working out all your unders and overs. The unders and overs being the bits that dive under each other and over, just the basic start to the carving. And once all these areas have been marked out, you can continue shaping from there. Once the carving's complete, we'll go to our plasterers who will plaster it with a wood grain texture, make it a bit more convincing as a piece of timber.
And I'm particularly happy with the green man, the green faces. So there's an idea of the spirits of nature. The green men or the green faces are a motif which developed in the Roman Middle East in the Middle Ages and absolutely flourished.
It would typically show a face, sometimes quite a kind of fearsome face, with vines and leaves kind of spouting out of the mouth.
It needed to feel like the dwelling place of someone quite dangerous, quite fierce. I wanted to make it slightly threatening, so the tables have animals sculpted that are looking at you when you eat.
So this is how you say Bayon. You say Bayon? Bayon. And what about Azog? Azog the Defiler. Very good.
There was a beautiful carved chair with two bear heads, which I was fascinated with. Unbelievable. This makes me want to take a wood carving.
Beorn's chair is very much based on Viking monumental thrones which exist in Scandinavia. There's this double-headed bear that's leering at whoever's looking at the chair.
Which obviously is a suggestion of what he can turn into. If you were to sit in that chair and someone took a photo of you, you literally look like a little person in a normal environment.
I loved that chair. I used to go into the set and sit in it, and you could get your back right up to the back of the chair, and your feet would stick out like a little kid in a big chair.
Bayon's props were kind of easy to conceive, really, because they were born out of necessity. So they were objects that he needed to sustain himself with.
This is Beorn's oven. Beautiful, beautiful job, and clearly very much oversized for wee dwarves. A very large sink and dirty dishes. Clearly, he's a bachelor.
One of the great props, I thought, more sort of iconic props inside Bayon's home was this chess set.
The chess set was a beautiful piece of work. That's Alan Lee-inspired drawing.
I was very keenly interested in chess at one time as well, so I had another motive for designing this thing. I was thinking that Bjorn might also have a kind of a chess.
Yeah.
He's always kind of whittling, we want to play that.
Yep. Yeah,
and
sure.
And there's some little animal figures that he's carved.
Yep.
The chess pieces for the chess set are that big. And so when you grasp them, your hands look small.
Probably the most beautiful chess set I've ever seen, I think, and I think, you know, every chess player in the world would like to have that on their mantelpiece.
We're just admiring Beorn's artifacts. Got my eye on a few things.
One of the things I'm
I'd just like to do is at the beginning of the movie, there's like a chest and bag end, and old Bilbo, you open up the chest and there's just a few souvenirs from this story. And one of these chess pieces would be a perfect thing.
It's almost as if the chess set was designed first and then the whole set was designed around it.
I think Bayon's house had exactly the right feel that it had in the book, that when you walk into that set and get a sense of the sort of way Bayon lives, it just felt right, and I think that was pretty spot on.
It was really an amazing set, such a friendly place, like all you can imagine about a friendly wood house. There's a gentle atmosphere in that house, I think.
It was like the house that you always dreamed of having, and having master carvers carve everything in your house. Every little thing was just absolutely perfect.
All of the little details that could make you believe it's real. It would be quite nice to have a place like this, wouldn't it?
I think Bayon's house is the place I'd happily live in. If I had to retire and you know, one of our sets somewhere, it would be Bayon's house.
Bayon, in his deep, rolling voice, told tales of the wild lands on this side of the mountains, and especially of the dark and dangerous wood that lay outstretched far to north and south, the day's ride before them, barring their way to the east, the terrible forest of Mirkwood.
Between the dwarves and the Lonely Mountain is a massive forest. It used to be called the Greenwood in the old days. Beautiful forest.
And then during this sort of period of Sauron's time at Dol Guldur, the darkness has moved into Greenwood the Great.
We started to have hints of this in the first movie, but here we finally arrive at what is now called Mirkwood.
This forest feels sick.
Mirkwood is a forest that has been diseased. It's like a virus has spread through it. A deterioration, a decay has spread from the south. And it's now basically becoming a very, very dangerous place.
Like almost everything else in Middle-earth, Mirkwood pre-existed Tolkien.
In the first place, it was a real place. Europe was covered by vast, dark forests. There's still a place called the Black Forest in Central Europe right to this day.
Mirkwood was once that whole range of forested mountains which separate much of Western Europe from the great steppe of Russia and Eastern Europe.
It's referred to in a number of the sagas by that name, Mirkwood.
Mirkvith in Okuni, the unknown Mirkwood, but we often translate the pathless Mirkwood, the wood which separates Hunland from Gothland. In ancient times, forests very often were boundaries, as we find in The Hobbit. This is the dark wood which separates, in this case, the land to the east of the Misty Mountains and Lake Town in Erebor.
Mirkwood existed in Tolkien's own writings before he came to write The Hobbit. In Beleriand, there is a forest called Tar-Nafuin, the Forest of Night, which is also referred to as Mirkwood. Tolkien actually uses that name.
The forest occurs in the great tales, as he called them, the tale of Beren and Luthien, the tale of Turin, son of Húrin. And that's where unfortunate and dangerous events take place. So the idea of the dangerous and threatening forest was there for Tolkien from way back.
Tolkien had this passion for woodland, and it gets into all his work, really. There's Fangorn from The Lord of the Rings, which is kind of a daunting place and should be a little bit scary.
I think Fangorn is perhaps the epitome of the ancient forests that where the trees would perhaps never die. They would just grow older and older.
It has this very benign element as represented by the Ents.
Sleep, little shirelings. There's also the old forest in The Lord of the Rings with Old Man Willow, which just had bad hearts. And that bad-heartedness might spread through the wood and communicate itself, so that a wood could go bad. And in fact, that's what happens with Mirkwood.
Mirkwood is a forest through which a corruption has spread. So the forest of Mirkwood has become a sort of sentient, disorienting, evil kind of place.
So with Mirkwood, we had an opportunity to create another kind of ancient forest. And I had drawn Mirkwood before in the book, and also I've been drawing kind of old ancient forests for as long as I can remember. You know, it's essentially what I do most of the time. And yeah, I just was kind of quite keen to get in and explore that environment, to see how creepy and strange we could make it.
We drew lots and lots of trees, all sorts of creepy, bent, gnarly trees.
You know, there's a whole lot of things going on in Mirkwood Forest, creepy things and scary things. You know, it's not something that exists in our world now.
The one thing that I've come to realise with dark forests is that you can never find them. I mean, we looked around locations for Mirkwood. I mean, you always end up wanting it to look like the dark forest in your imagination, and there's never an actual living trees or forest that really ever look like that. So they become studio-bound forests.
I'd love to go on location for a forest because it's done by Mother Nature. But when we have to do it in a studio, it's a huge amount of work. And unlike architectural builds, like buildings or what have you, there's a lot more interpretation there.
Forests are some of the hardest things, I think, to visualize, especially when you have to build them.
Mirkwood was an ancient forest. So we made these huge trees.
These were built up to about 6 or 8 meters in height, because that was about as high as you could possibly go.
But in diameter, some of them were ranging up to 6 to 7 meters in diameter. They were colossal things.
It was interesting to me to see some of the set decorators who would take pieces of bark and impress them into wet plaster so that they could then get moulds that they could peel off and put up on the phony trees.
This needed to be a diseased, dying forest realm, which had obviously been poisoned. One way we achieved that sensation was to use a lot of colour. This was part of the early discussions with Guillermo del Toro.
When Guillermo was working on the project, he brought some ideas which were more kind of stylized in a way.
Guillermo del Toro had a book by an artist, Ivan Doyle, and his magnificent fluorescent forest scapes that he'd paint.
And he'd done some amazing paintings of forests for Disney. Trees which were quite kind of stylized.
We sort of started to introduce some of his colours, and I think one day it just clicked. There was a moment when we realised that you can express absolutely anything you want by the way that you apply the colour, and if you go all out, you can kind of achieve this really bizarre-looking, amazing, sick forest.
We did certainly want that hallucinogenic kind of weird quality, which Guillermo very much established.
Peter very much wanted to have quite bright colors, working on the idea that he can always mute the colors down, but he certainly can't dial them up.
I think it's easier for you to have too much and us to dial it down in the grade.
Yeah,
we can just make it more mono. We can take some of the saturation out, the colour out in the grade, and
easily.
So in order to have those trees end up at roughly the place that we wanted them, on the set we painted trees in quite vivid colours, you know, almost like, we were back in 1967 again.
Everything was bold, and like the purples are really purple, the reds are really red, like the primary colours are really psychedelic.
I said to Pete, wow, it's really trippy. It sort of felt like being in a Tim Burton movie, stepping on that, in terms of the brightness of the colours.
All the trees, all the logs, even the puddles, it was just one big sort of psychedelic sort of universe in a way, really.
In Mirkwood Forest, mushrooms were our friend. They're one of the great sort of colour challenges that nature throws out there. And, you know, some are orange and some are bright yellow and some are green.
Very kind of brightly coloured fungi. You know, sometimes highly coloured things are poisonous, like certain insects that are very kind of highly coloured, or snakes, you know, you tend to think of them as being more poisonous. So that was another route into the design look of the forest.
I'm lost. I've been lost for a couple hours. I've been eating these mushrooms, and I'm hallucinating. I feel like I'm in a movie. Where am I? Mommy? Mom.
So the set of Mirkwood is supposed to be quite intimidating for the actors. It's supposed to be a set where you get lost very easily and it's very hard to find your way, and filming there was quite hard, and for the crew we're just getting lost all the time and we're losing Dwarf all the time.
No, other way, Peter. Other way, Peter. Peter. Other way. I think you've got the wrong man in front, if you ask me. I know one of you poor bastards get lost.
Bringing that parts of Mirkwood, I felt like I was on an alien planet. You know, at a glance, if you're walking the forest, it would look like a forest, but then there might be these giant spider webs all of a sudden, that because there's these giant spiders that live in Mirkwood.
What's the latest state of the art for spider webs? It's we have a lot of spider webs, and is spider web technology still the same as it used to be, spraying it out of a glue gun?
We have the same system that we use.
With that stringy rubber stuff and things.
We had developed a system on Lord of the Rings. We used a polymer product which was drizzled onto pans of water and pulled out, and it was this wonderful sort of translucent, stretchy material which we could wrap people and make big, grunty spider webs. So Shelob's webs were quite big and kind of primitive. She was an early spider. What we wanted to do with the cobwebs in Hobbit was to give them a little more finesse so we could get ultra-fine, proper cobwebs.
So you'd have to manufacture the stuff into about a metre by metre sort of size, and then you'd lift it up and be able to stretch it to any size you wished. It was quite amazing stuff.
The web technology was something also that we hadn't really done before at Weta Digital. So the technical guys were all working on how are we going to make this work.
We actually did do a lot of research on webs and so forth, and it's actually amazing how many different types of webs there are. We had a look at a lot of trapdoor webs and so forth. The Australian funnel web, me being Australian, I was quite fond of that one. There was these webs that silkworms actually made, so we referenced some of that as well. But just doing the spider webs was really, really hard to do in CG. We had to work out a way of doing that. And the way we did that was we built curves. We built millions and millions of curves. Curves they're just like strands. You just think of an individual spider web. We had to get millions of these things together, all crisscross, all to get the density out of that web.
So what I have here on the screen is what the final concept for our spider nest would look like. And this is our main web nest that we ended up building. I think there's about 45 webs in here in total.
The difficulty was to get a progression of the growing concentration of webs and spiders' nests. Eventually the dwarves get captured and strung up, cocooned high above in the branches.
Tolkien actually described this, that the cocoons don't actually completely cover the whole dwarf. You get kind of the odd nose and bit of beard and foot kind of sticking out.
The whole concept was that our dwarves would all be hanging from a branch way up in the air. So what we did was we worked out a way of making our limbs look like they were 40 feet up in the air, but they were never more than 3 feet off the ground.
Yeah, oops.
When the adrenaline's going.
When the adrenaline's going, your balance comes back when the adrenaline's going.
So whenever you were on this thing, you always felt as though you were in the middle of the trees until you looked at the ground, which was covered in green screen.
The spaces involved in forests are far beyond what you can ever hope to achieve on a soundstage, and the sets that were built for Mirkwood were kind of like the foundation in order to actually build the forest itself.
We built this huge set, but once you get a camera in there, the distance from the front of the stage to the back of the stage, it's really not that big of a distance. And Pete wanted Mirkwood to just be this huge, huge depth. So when you saw it in 3D space, it went on for miles and miles.
The digital Mirkwood forest, it's huge. You got every single blade of grass, every single leaf on the ground. You got the trunk of the trees, you got the twigs of the trees, you got every single leaf in the tree. It took a lot of computer power to do so.
Trees are surprisingly hard. You look at a tree and you just take a tree for, it's a tree. But you try to replicate that on CG, and they're complicated shapes.
They are very organic, the shape of them. So as you build curves in 3D geometry, you need more resolution. So the more detail you have in things, the more resolution you need. And as you go down into the branching levels, you need more and more resolution in the geometry. As opposed to Erebor, where it's all very big flat planes, the resolution of the geometry is very low. Comparably, one tree is probably equal to most of Erebor.
We've got software developers working constantly to make these trees more efficient for rendering.
We developed this program called Lumberjack, and that would build like trees. You'd basically build a trunk, and it would work out, the height of the tree, what has to be the height, and then it would work out the branching and the support that the tree would have to be. But the thing with the Mirkwood forests, which we really struggled to get right, was you've got these huge trees and you place one tree here and about 20 meters later you put another tree. The issue was the branches crashed together and we had this tangle of mess of twigs and things like that.
What looked great from the start of the camera movement, when you moved around to this side, suddenly there's vine that's kind of bunching it up or making it look like spaghetti, as Peter would say.
It just becomes so heavy that it becomes difficult to work with as a model. So there's been a bit of kind of pruning, and it's been quite a trial for everyone, I think.
What I enjoyed most about Mirkwood was actually seeing it all come together. The first time I saw the spider's nest, I thought, wow, this is going to look really good.
That forest wants to kill you. And the only way it can kill you is that you have to end up killing yourself virtually by doing the things that you're not supposed to do, by going in the stream, the water, the enchanted water, and it's out to conspire against you. It's going to play with your head.
Once we were inside Mirkwood, designing our way through to the other side, it seemed to be quite difficult to actually have a clear idea of the place as a whole. I must sound like I got totally lost in Mirkwood, actually, kind of like the dwarves did, but perhaps that's just how it is in Mirkwood.
In a great cave some miles within the edge of Mirkwood, on its eastern side there lived at this time their greatest king. Before his huge doors of stone, a river ran out of the heights of the forest and flowed on and out into the marshes at the feet of the high wooded lands.
It was really exciting to visit Thranduil's realm, because here we are with elves. We know what elves are. But where are we going? We're going somewhere very different.
Tolkien created these different elf races. They're kind of related, but they're distinct kind of branches of the elven kingdoms, which are represented in the different environments.
The Rivendell elves, they have this sort of Art Nouveau influence to their design, but they still live on a very sort of almost a human plane. They have houses.
It has a kind of the feeling of a museum full of libraries and very much a centre of elven culture in which various artefacts have been collected.
Whereas the Lothlorien elves, they're a much more ethereal type of elf. They live up in amongst the trees.
These huge malon trees in which the elves live. It's very much a kind of the spiritual centre of elvendom in Middle-earth.
I think all the realms of the elves in Third Age are guarded realms in a sense that they are protected. But Thranduil's woodland realm was a little different. than the other elven realms in that the guarding is obvious and is not invisible. It's a closed city, it's underground, it's definitely more fortified.
It's different than Elrond's court, you know, it's different than the last homely house. It's, you know, it's not that, it's a cave.
Tolkien's depiction of the caves of King Thranduil was very heavily influenced by the old folktale tradition of the elves who live in the Elf Hills. Many of what are believed to be Elf Hills in tradition and in folklore are in fact ancient barrows. They're constructed mounds. Over time, people came to think of the fairy folk as actually living inside the mounds, and so we got the idea of them being small, like leprechauns. The original idea was that that was simply the entrance, that was the portal into the world that the Tuatha De Danann or the elves or the fair folk lived in.
Yeah, so Tolkien would have known all those stories and very much drew on that, I think, for The Hobbit.
I think one thing that many people may not be aware of is that Tolkien's elves have lived underground in other stories.
Much of Tolkien's early mythological writing is about the history of the elves. But because of continuing wars, they have a strong tendency to set up hidden kingdoms. And there are perhaps 3 of these. There's the hidden city of Gondolin, whose king is Turgon. There's the hidden city, the cave city of Nargothrond, whose king is Finrod. And there's the kingdom of Doriath, headed by Elu Thingol.
Thingol had created this guarded realm. He'd retreated from the world's problems by going underground and created this amazing guarded realm called Menegroth.
Tolkien clearly was inspired by his own construction of King Thingol living in the 1,000 caves of Menegroth when he came to create a very similar setting in The Hobbit.
You could almost see Thranduil borrowing a few things from Thingol's playbook. I mean, their solution to the problems of the world is to remove themselves from it and hide away.
The fortunes of the world will rise and fall, but here in this kingdom, we will endure.
The Woodland Realm was meant to be a very organic-looking place. It's all underground, but Peter really didn't want it to look like a cave.
You're thinking, okay, how do you make a cave look not like a cave? So we really wanted to somehow bring the grandeur of Lothlorien into a cave. So at that point, I just sit back and let Alan Lee and John Howe sketch away, and I just wait for them to draw something cool.
So we needed to find a sort of underground palace, if you like, that would somehow feel elven.
Must have done dozens and dozens of drawings for the whole environment. Like all elves, they love ornamentation and beauty in natural forms, but unlike Rivendell, nothing around them is actually constructed in a way. There are lots of kind of carved arches and pillars within the cave, but it's a much more kind of naturally formed environment.
Yeah, it just feels a wee bit too sort of expensive.
We got quite far along actually designing this very classical kind of throne room, and Peter wasn't really having any of that. He didn't want a large, flat audience chamber. He wanted something different.
I mean, when I look at this, what I immediately think of is I think, well, what can we do that we've never seen in a throne before? And one of the things I was just thinking is about, well, what would happen if the floor wasn't flat? That there was like there was a central walkway to the throne, and then there was a couple of layers or a couple of different sort of step downs or heights. So just something that was a little bit kind of unusual.
The idea that emerged was that it would be like being in a forest, except you're underground.
Over thousands of years, they've carved the stalactites and stalagmites into shapes that represent trees to them.
It is this beautifully complex mastery of the use of wood and earth to create these flying walkways and incredibly complex staircases in the underground realm.
The best way to describe it would be to imagine walking down the nave of the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, but not on the floor, but 100 feet up, with the light coming in through the windows and be able to walk through those columns, and very colorful and grand.
You know, an underground realm is only lit by artificial light. But how do you make that something of spectacular beauty?
Where is the light coming from? This is always the grand question, isn't it? Well, in our case, it's coming from the lighting crew, which, no, I'm kidding. We're working on the premise that the caverns are not totally buried underground. There are openings that the light can filter down through.
Sort of a very firm rule of thumb that we have is when we have big spaces, you can't cheat that. You have to have lots and lots of individual light sources. You know, you've got your overall sunlight, which is reasonably ambient, but in terms of the practical, the lantern light, you know, we just have lots and lots of those light sources.
The elves were living with this gorgeous golden light, which was obtained through the amber bulbs. And the amber could either be tree sap, or it could be a living rock.
So would we use any of that resin? Yeah, the original idea.
Oh, the amber?
Yeah, the
yes.
amber.
We were thinking about using that for the lights.
And there could be some where the light comes in through the roof.
That's a good idea, yeah.
There was one very important element that we needed for Thranduil's realm, and that was his throne. Needed to really reflect his character.
We went through a lot of designs for Thranduil's throne. Oh, I don't know how many drawings we did.
The idea that started to emerge most strongly was that of incorporating this kind of staghorn element. That really sprang from this little detail in the story where just after they've crossed the stream, a stag appears. And the implication is that the stag is a sacred animal to the elves.
One of the traditional features of old folklore is that the elves were associated with the white deer. It's very much an association with the other world. And if you interact with it, you may stray over into its world. And that's really perilous.
We find it in the stories of King Arthur, where they're at a feast, the doors are open, and a stag runs right through the hall and out the other side and disappears. It's the kind of the portent of an adventure.
You see the white stag or the white doe, and naturally, you think, that's really strange, I'm going to chase that. But actually, that may be a trap.
Thorin takes a shot at it. He's definitely kind of violated a taboo.
Shouldn't have done that. It's bad luck.
It seemed that this was going to be some kind of totemic or emblematic figure for Thranduil. And of course, Thranduil is riding a great kind of horned beast, an elk.
At one point, Alan put two deer's heads on the armrests of the throne, and then I did the one with the huge antlers that are sculpted out on both sides of the throne.
We found there was a particular type of elk that existed prehistorically in Ireland that had antlers that they used almost as shovels. So that became a design influence for Thranduil's throne, and we developed up this carving of these huge elk antlers.
Are these plasticine?
Yep. Oh, this polyhedral.
Oh, yeah. I think it just needs to, you know, if that one curves there and this one kind of curves out of it, you know, you've sort of got that. Yeah. So one goes up and one goes down, that could go down.
Yeah, that was a monster. Trying to make something that large with that spread of antlers. I think there are about 12 foot either side, 12 feet that way and 12 feet that way. So 20, I think, yeah, it might have been a 24-foot sort of span, you know, then arched around like that. So they're bloody big.
I couldn't believe it when I walked into that set. I was just like, that's awesome.
Oh, God, it's cool.
Such a kind of position of power.
It was just the throne and a path and some steps. And then you get shown the art, the concept art for what that throne room will actually look like in the movie. And it's incredible.
It was quite an interesting design process because you're faced with the difficulty of having quite small sets, which you need to put into quite a wide environment. We basically built the things that actors needed to walk on And all the rest was done in post-production.
The production built a floor. They built a low dais around that floor that essentially was just the edge of the floor area. But everything else, including the columns that are on top of that low-level dais, the walkway immediately off the throne area, and everything beyond that is entirely digital.
To really get the scope of what we wanted, there was no place you could build that big. And because we needed the freedom to move the camera through it, it just became more practical to create that as a digital environment.
John did a lot of the designs for the interior of Thranduil's, and John's got a passion for waterfalls, so everywhere you look, there are waterfalls.
John Howe definitely loves waterfalls, and you know, as we worked our way through the different environments, you know, we got to do a lot of water simulations. And John's initial concept art of the cells that the dwarves get thrown into just had lots and lots of waterfalls in it.
So here I was blithely drawing waterfalls everywhere. You know, waterfalls and rivulets and, you know, little cascades. And I had no idea how hard it actually is to create.
When we were rendering water, it could commonly take up to 24 hours to see one frame come back, depending on how far and how complex some of the simulations were.
And we were like, John, do you think we really need to have that much water? Because we've already done water in other parts, so maybe we don't need quite as much water. And he was like, okay, that's fine. So, yeah, there's still water, of course, but there's maybe not quite as much as there might have otherwise been in that environment.
We won't have it like water going all the way through here, but we'll just do a much more distant waterfall in the, you know, sort of. But
do you want us to try and get a shimmer?
I know, wouldn't that be great?
We had to create a prison, and we wanted everything in there to be beautiful, but then we didn't want the prison to be too kind of pleasant. For example, with the prison bars, you want them to feel kind of daunting and strong and oppressive, but to have an elegance to them.
You know, everything elvish, I loved playing an elf because everything is beautiful, even in what is supposed to be the dank, dark, deep dungeon.
If you had to be in jail, it's probably not a bad place to be in jail, if you have a sort of design aesthetic at all, but it's still a jail.
It was very nice. William and I are in here, and you know, I mean, they said cosy one better close to the waterfall.
We're knocking out that wall and we're putting a balcony out over the elven waterfall, out over the back, and then hopefully one day, but this is a sort of long-term plan, we're going to bash through to the other cell and just sort of widen the whole place out.
And Bilbo wants us to go down to the waters and in the barrels to escape, but I got the cable guy coming. Like he said between 8 and 12, which is like, you know, doesn't really help much. So I can't really go.
Marvellous. That was probably the largest of all the sets that was built for the interior of Thranduil's realm. It was really a multi-tiered set built around a kind of a chasm. We extended that set off so that we could see off to a distant waterfall and a cascade. And then there's the angle that the dwarves go down when Bilbo leads them down into the cellars, which is the other end of the set.
The set of the wine cellar was incredible. It was beautiful. It was you know, it was like an elven wine cellar, so obviously for us dwarves it's even bigger.
I mean, the wine cellar brief it's elven, so it's different, but it's still a wine cellar, and you need to recognise instantly that it is a wine cellar.
The biggest components of the dressing in there was a huge collection of wine bottles. Thranduil was probably a bit of a closet alcoholic. He likes his wine, but don't we all?
Wine bottles are actually quite a recent thing, historically, and very much belongs to the 19th century. So that means it's a little bit of an anachronism in that sense, and I wanted very much for these bottles not to appear in any way modern.
And we sort of discovered a bottle design, you know, not a conventional bottle, but a round bottomed bottle that can sit in a metal holder.
So the wine bottles in Thranduil's chamber we had blown specially for the film, and they were made in Wanganui. I think it's one of the oldest sort of glass blowers in New Zealand, and they had the facilities to be able to produce enough of these wine bottles.
They have to stack. How many high are they going to be?
I think this is it, but there's going to be stacks of them 2.5, 3 metres high in places. So,
but as soon as you have bottles, People think, oh, we need wine labels. And you think, all right, wine label, right, wine labels are like that. Well, no. When were wine labels invented? Well, you know, pretty recently. And that's why we ended up with this sort of a seal and a little piece of parchment to identify it.
The wine bottles were such a success that the producers, in their wisdom, decided to use them as a gift for the crew, and so we ended up making a large number of wine bottles and getting one of our better wine producers to fill them.
It's really lovely. Better than a T-shirt.
It sure is. We do actually have a sort of thriving wine industry in New Zealand and a legitimate use of barrels.
You could live in a thing like this, eh? Yeah. I feel very philosophical all of a sudden.
Do you reckon I can get to him then?
We had stacks and stacks of these magnificent barrels that we had made by a proper barrel maker.
Actually, the most efficient way to make a barrel is to get a cooper to make you a real barrel. And so we went out there to the wine industry and found a friendly cooper who made us numerous barrels.
Hold your breath.
Hold my breath.
What do you mean?
All that stuff you see with the ramp and the barrels going down, all practical, all working.
The process of designing that, because it was always going to be a major episode in the film, that started with Guillermo. We had all kinds of interesting ideas. We had routes that were kind of incorporated into the whole environment. We kind of used those in some of the ideas, so that you'd have the barrels kind of rolling down a route that was almost like a helter-skelter, and then kind of rolling around and disappearing into a hole in the middle. But I think in the end, we came down to something that was very simple.
It was done on a pivot point like a seesaw. It was controlled by a hydraulic ram, and it was turned on for up and off for down.
As it tipped, we had different pins holding different barrels. So as it tipped down, it released the front pins and held the next ones back so that they didn't jam up all the time, because it was just a narrow hole for them all to go through.
3, 2, 1, action.
We did a few rehearsals, but you got a bottleneck or a barrel neck down the bottom of the ramp where the barrels couldn't be cleared off the stage floor quick enough. So we had some guys down there whipping them out of the way so the other barrels could keep coming down. But that took a couple of tries to get that right.
We managed to get quite a few good takes. I think Peter was like, oh, so what are you worried about? Let's do it again. And of course, then the next 2 or 3 times it didn't work at all. You know, like, damn.
And it's Bomber that's left sitting there. Oh dear. Poor Bomber. All right, okay.
I love the beauty of the Elven realm. This set was one of those instances where you walk onto set and you're transported into the world you need to be in.
You arrive and you're in another universe. And we're all in genuine awe of it. You know, we walk around just being really grateful for it and just admiring the workmanship and the detail in it.
I mean, the detail is incredible. I mean, there's little things that you'd never, ever see. But because they're there, it just makes it so real, you know? And you just feel like you're in a real place.
Tolkien describes these environments so that they're much richer than just kind of places where the action happens. They've got their own character, they've got their own distinct style. That makes it a really rewarding experience, actually developing and creating these environments.
A great bridge made of wood ran out to where, on huge piles made of forest trees, was built a busy wooden town. Not a town of elves, but of men, who still dared to dwell here under the shadow of the distant Dragon Mountain.
Lake Town was a fantastic place to visit. We're going somewhere a little bit more kind of exotic and slightly kind of outlandish.
This is a frontier town. This is a town on the edge of wilder places.
Lake Town is kind of a newer environment that you hadn't seen in the previous Hobbit film. It's a city that actually was built upon the ruins of an older city.
That first city was made of stone, and pieces of that city, which was obviously a very grand city indeed, are poking up through the surface of the lake.
And that helps with creating this rather anarchic structure of buildings that none of them are standing up particularly well. They're all kind of sinking. It feels very lived in, but also very precarious.
I wanted it like a Dickensian slum, that sort of feel where it's got a faded glory, a sadness to it, but a very quirky character.
We originally started drawing Lake Town very much the way that Tolkien had imagined it, very much inspired by the whole idea of the Swiss lake dwelling.
Tolkien subscribed to archaeological magazines, so we know that he was very well informed on things like the archaeological research of lake villages. And in the 1850s, there was a big drought, and some of the lakes in Switzerland, the water level went down, and they saw these pylons sticking out of the mud. And they realized that there had been people who had built platforms out over the water back in the Celtic times.
Buildings out on the lake are really very familiar in Northern Europe. The Irish have a special word for them, which is crannog, and there are actually probably hundreds of crannogs in the lakes of Ireland and Scotland.
They were in England. Glastonbury had a lake village, which is not that far from Oxford where Tolkien was living at the time. The question is, why would you put all of these upright piers, build a platform on it, build houses on it, when you could just live on the shore of the lake? And the general explanation is, well, it was more defensible, that it's hard for enemies to come at you if you're out over the water. But I think Tolkien came up with a fantasy explanation, because one of the odd features is these lake towns tend mostly to have burned down in the end. And so you have a fantasy explanation of why would people go to all this trouble might be, well, it's a good defense against the dragons.
Complexities of Lake Town. Built on water. Okay, so the town built on water. Now this is a, I think it's really cool myself. I think it's fantastic, and to me, it's not a problem at all. It's one of the things that's going to make it neat to use in the movie.
Well, the idea with Lake Town, we wanted to make it feel a bit more kind of remote, getting close to sort of the unknown lands. And Lake Town is very much a kind of a trading station, right on the borders of the known world.
We started designing Lake Town as a very Celtic kind of place. And then it became rather more sophisticated. And it's true that the presence of a mayor and this idea of trade quickly pointed to something more like Venice, but made of wood.
One of the influences for this town was those Asian villages on big river deltas. The little houses are individually built. They're all on top of each other. So you need the access with canals, lots of boats.
Lake Town's greatest influence, I think, would be the Russian wooden architecture and Norwegian stave churches with these wonderful peaked roofs with, roofs superimposed on roofs and towers.
It's all timber, lots of shingles, big kind of overhanging gables and decorative roof ridges.
Stave churches were a huge influence on the design, especially for the town hall.
All of the buildings wanted to feel a little bit like they were ships. So we had every prow or every frontage of every house or shop has got an effigy of some sort of ship's prow.
Lake Town is an example where we know it's going to look big and nice and interesting, but what the real issue for us is what we have to build.
So we designed a lot of individual buildings, but when it comes down to deciding what you're actually going to physically build, we essentially did that by modelling up a lot of the designs and laying them out on top of a table which represented the size of the studio.
We made a little square the size of the studio, and we started shuffling buildings around and working out where our canals would work, where boats could move.
The Grand Canal can head off either in that direction, could be one, and then it can come out through here. I mean, maybe this is a big waterway that is in the middle of the city here, big sort of a lakey kind of...
Sure.
So you're literally just looking at all these buildings that you've got, and you say, okay, let's put that one over here, and you're kind of designing it on a table with these cardboard models.
So originally we laid it out as to how big it would be and the shape that it would take. In the end, it was too big.
Well, you only got, you got to shoot everything. Where's the wall?
You quickly realise that you've run out of studio space by the time you actually do this.
We couldn't fit it in the bigger stages because you needed room on the side to put the techno cranes and, and stuff like that. So it had to be a lot smaller.
The other option would be to shift this all down there a bit and to put Bard's house here and include that canal as one of the Bard.
Yeah,
going past Bard's house.
we could do that.
Is the other option, isn't it?
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time and energy getting the models right, bringing more detail to our models and even painting them up to a finish.
Only on The Hobbit have we kind of had the skill level and also had the facilities to push these models to a final finish.
The Lake Town model was almost as good as a shootable miniature by the time we'd finished it. It's a work of art in itself. They should go to a museum, a small museum.
Oh, that's right, it's only Bard.
It was very important that we got the models right so that Peter could approve that, and then that was the green light for us to go ahead with the build. Lake Town is a wonky town, is a wonky city, so nothing is flat, nothing is level, nothing is straight up and down.
So part of the problem we faced was actually encouraging the carpenters to build things that weren't straight. Very hard.
Everyone's had to throw away their old rules about building conventional buildings and go with these very kind of wonky, obtuse angles. This is where we establish exactly how wonky the architecture is getting. And the next phase is to clad these surfaces with the textures that really start to tell the story of the people of Long Lake.
Blues and silvers were the main overall colour influences in Lake Town, and they're chosen because they're essentially fish colours, fish and sea colours.
It had a real fishing theme to it, so all of the carvings were all fish-based.
In Middle-earth, each culture seems to have their motif, and like Rohan and their horse, Lake Town was
motif, the buildings have sort of scale work on them.
Like Lake Town, whereas when you then have to make it decay and look like it's faded, because that adds a whole layer of history to it.
We must find these troublemakers and arrest them.
My thoughts exactly so. Alan designed the main area inside with that colonnade and the office.
I think the interior was particularly beautifully dressed, and I spent a lot of time kind of doing these little detailed kind of wooden carved panels, and one of the little figurative elements was a little head carved above a doorway, and the sculptor, he made a little portrait of John as a kind of little homage to him.
That's my cameo up there. Looks good, doesn't it?
Looks amazing.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's really coming together.
I think this is my favourite set so far. It's got that kind of quality of an institution, a tax office. It just reminds me of the kind of places that occasionally visit in provincial town halls in England.
The Master's Chambers was full of ledgers and documents from the old times when things were good. So we manufactured hundreds and hundreds of books for that set, and we'd been fortunate enough to purchase the old ledgers from a bank in Wellington, and the ledgers were over 100 years old. So the contents of all of these books were just as beautiful as the exterior of them.
1918. Going through someone's accounts. But everyone's got nice handwriting.
It was such a pleasure to work in that hall because the level of detail that the designers and the set designers was astounding. You could be in there all day reading little bits of paper that had little notes and things on them, you know.
And someone has written in the most beautiful handwriting and aged it so that the ink looks very, very old. You know, the camera will never see it, but it's there.
You picked the wrong man to tangle with, Master Bard.
The master had to have a throne, and there's a lot of time went into concept work for that throne, and eventually John that came up with a concept that Peter liked, which was that the throne would have major fish elements.
You know how salmon, when they spawn, the males get this incredibly underslung jaw. It looks quite fierce and quite predatory, and to me that kind of symbolized the nature of the mayor of Laketown, is he's a little bit of a commercial predator in that he's making lots of money. And that's why I put these two fish on his chair.
What is the meaning of this? We call them sealing weapons, sire. Ah, enemies of the state, eh?
Winter in Laketown was a big part of the visual storytelling that we had to try and portray on the set.
Epsom salts, magnesium sulfate.
We have several techniques to produce fake snow and ice. On the water, the floating ice consisted of a Dacron base, a white sort of insulation foamy base, drizzled with wax.
It has a structural integrity factor from Dacron blanket, which is acting as an integral part of the support to stop it breaking. And then we're melting paraffin wax into the mould.
Well, he came into work and I was too scared to say, I had a dream about ice just last night. And he goes, I've been too scared to tell you about it. I had a dream about ice as well. So just about every night we have a dream about bloody ice.
You see big white squares in front of your eyes all the time.
Even though it wasn't cold, just looking at this ice, it was so realistic that it gave you the chills. Have you seen the ice? No. Look at this one. Disgusting.
Excuse me, which way's Dale? Dale. Which way is it? Is it there? That way? Okay.
You build a city on a lake, you've got to have boats. And one of the great fun things we did on this film was we built 30 boats.
Jeffrey Sinclair was our lead boat builder. He wrangled the team of boat builders.
You can see what we're making here. This is our skiff, the smallest one we're going to do. Bard's skiff is one of these.
We designed every plank and every rib of each boat in the computer and then assembling them using traditional boat builders, assembling these computer-cut cassette boats.
Because the frames are CNC cut, they have to be spot on. So to set it up, we use a laser level, which we have set up here, and we can just check for it to be exact, right down to the nearest millimetre. And that just makes sure that everything goes together neatly.
One of the parameters we're working with was we were trying to work in 400 millimetres of water. So, you know, roughly 1.5 foot of water for these boats. So you couldn't have a great big deep draft boat. We had to cut the bottoms off and build them as flat bottom boats. Two advantages here. One is they don't draw nearly as much water, and the other one is that they're very stable. So you can have people who are not necessarily very familiar with boats walking around in them and they don't tip over.
Oh, they'll float, yeah. I wouldn't cross an ocean, but they'll float. Yeah, they're all watertight. They'll all be watertight. Yeah.
Oh, look what's happening. Goodness gracious. This is the fishing boat, which is, we've got 3 days to put a mast on it, rig it, and so we've got to get it looking beautiful. Look at these fellows. So everybody works together, as we should, as we should.
The Laketown set that we built in K-Stage was a massive, massive set. It basically took up the most space you can take up.
They built the set almost right up to the walls, like as much as they sort of could allow for some of the big apparatus, like the scissor lifters and some of the big sort of devices to carry the big lights. But, oh, it was tight in there. It was real tight.
I mean, it fills the whole soundstage.
There were canals, there was water, and we had like sometimes 50, 60 people, you know, trying to get from one side of Lake Town to the other, and they had to use the same little bridges and walkways and staircases as the characters do in the film.
We usually put Peter's tent, well, obviously as close as we can from the action, but, you know, Peter were doing shots where we could see almost like 160 degrees of people running in the street, and there's no room for him, so we ended up hiding his tent in one of the little houses, and I remember our department putting drapes and, you know, curtains to kind of hide where Peter was hiding for him to look at the monitors and look at what the action was.
Okay, here we go, and action. Second action.
Even though it is a very poor, decrepit old city, it still has a life to it which needs to be imbibed into the set through the subtleties and the set dressing, if you like.
Great, fantastic layers of dressing in Lake Town. We sort of designed the set around industry and shops and making a believable sort of market that had different vendors that you'd have in a market.
The marketplace really was all about how the people of this town lived, and so you needed to justify what sort of stalls would be there by what the needs of a community living in this environment would be, you know, and so obviously clothing is an issue. Food is an issue, so both of those things were big players. A lot of fish, huge amount of fish in this marketplace.
Well, what do you got? Let's see, we've got fresh snapper. This is the flounder over here. If you're like some bottom feeder. Well, I'm a bottom feeder, so, you know, I think we all are, really.
What we did in terms of our marketplace was we went out into our community, and in New Zealand has a sort of reasonably large alternative lifestyle community, and we got people from those areas who had the skills that we needed. So pretty much anything from bookbinding to knife making to glass blowing to all of those wonderful old skills we used for the movie.
And at the moment we're in the middle of a large run of lanterns for the Lake Town scenes.
Obviously, Lake Town itself was going to be a huge user of pottery. And Ivan was our potter. He was on the job from day one.
Ivan the potter was busy. He was just making pots all over the show, yeah. He had his own pottery area and he'd crank them out left, right and centre. He was very prolific.
And maybe the challenge is because there's just hundreds to make, I can't fluff around too much with a piece, you know, meticulously sculpted. It has to be kind of fast and spontaneous. The trickiness is to add the little bit of flavour, the distinctive flavour of that race or that style, or that culture, like the fish scales or whatever.
Yeah, the Lake Town sets were elaborate, detailed, really impressive works of art.
There was a lot of things like fishing nets and these fantastic glass buoys that would sort of bend the light.
There were these little glass balls, like a little cluster of glass balls that were hanging from the sort of dock that we were on. And I live in Hawaii, so now I'm familiar with some of the old Japanese styles of fishing, that would have been a floater, and they would have used that to float their line.
One of the really crucial parts of Lake Town was to describe the written language. And our graphics master, Daniel Reeve, has a special way with a quill.
Lake Town, we've gone a bit further east in look than we've been before. So I introduced some bits and pieces from the Cyrillic alphabet, or the look of it at least, into how Lake Town looks. It's quite kind of long and thin and reminiscent of docks and wharves and fishing paraphernalia and that sort of thing.
We went to notice boards and public announcements, things like that, and they were little moments posted all over the set. Funny little advertisements like lost boats, and have you seen my left oar, and things like that.
Yeah, that looks interesting.
Being a city of 5,000 was sort of reasonably large, and so we had to build the set a number of times. I mean, it would have been great to have built the set once, left it in the studio, and come and gone. But every time, you know, due to actor availability as well as various other issues, we built Lake Town 5 times. We did have our big exterior set out in the back lot.
Pretty impressive when I was seeing it being built. Like, everyone kept telling me they're going to fill it up here with water, and I was thinking, how are they going to do that? But I still don't know how it works.
They built this ingenious wall of big, thick concrete blocks, and they flooded it with water. I mean, it's incredible when you see the size of it.
I love the feeling, you know, when you're filming and you forget you're on a set, you know? So you turn a corner and you're being surrounded by houses and you think, am I in Lake Town right now? So that's always a good feeling, and then you turn around and you see the green screen, you know?
What's brilliant about this set, I guess, is that Peter can shoot from so many different angles without worrying about having to move stuff around, because whichever way you look here, it's a brilliant backdrop.
And like me and Aidan on Lake Town specifically, we were walking around thinking, okay, if we had to buy a piece of real estate here, which house would you live in? He's like, I'd live in that one because it's by the pub, or, you know, I'd live in that one because it's got a good view of the river, or, you know, have a little courtyard here and you get a wine there and watch the sunset from there and we'd go fishing.
So a little cafe in Lake Town, little chessboard, somewhere to relax, you know, on a sunny morning. You do a bit of fishing if you felt like it. Just very much sort of make yourself at home in Lake Town.
It really does bring out the child in you.
I always think it would be really good to play a game of paintball here. Loads of nooks and crannies to hide into.
Going through to another part of Lake Town. I'm going to get the cameraman to do something very, very stupid now. I'm going to get him to walk the gangplank.
All these little bridges that light up, you're constantly getting wet.
I really enjoyed that set in the back lot. And it's also big enough that you could sort of get lost in the middle of it and kind of imagine that you were, you know, really somewhere else.
I'd say Lake Town would have been the biggest build we did, just because of, A, the water, the movability of the sets, and the amount of times we built various Lake Town sets.
Like the set of Lake Town. No idea what that cost. I've got no idea. And I've made a few big films, but not on, no, this scale is, it's almost hilarious.
All right, we'll fix that.
Okay, so this is now looking down over Lake Town, is it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There it is. Look at that.
That's big budget. That is a big budget down there.
Look at the money that's been
Oh,
spent on
I'd
that.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stretches for miles, as far as the eye can see.
Doesn't it?
Lake Town is big. That means much use of green screen. No matter how big you think it is in a studio when you go in there, and it's quite impressive to go on a huge big stage with a big set, you know, it's got to be bigger than that in the film.
You know, you can only get so many buildings on a stage, and we needed Lake Town to look like it supported a fairly sizable, you know, population.
Because you couldn't build an entire city, because it's quite a large city, it was up to us to extend those buildings and extend the people and the crowds and the feeling of the city off beyond the green screen.
All the models that have been made for the actual set construction were of such a good standard that we could scan them and then use them as the basis for the set extensions.
So for each of the buildings that were designed on set, we designed a digital one that matched exactly to it. So they originally built the entire city digitally, broke it down into neighborhoods, like this is the Merchant District, this is the Soldier District. set. And as you can see, we had to extend it quite a bit. You just have the boat and you have a couple of buildings.
But this is very funny. I remember the day we shot this scene where I was on this boat and everybody has their lunch and they were all sitting in the windows watching me sail through the car park. It's very odd. It's a funny day.
We weren't even shooting the set. We were shooting the production building with all of the people sitting in their desks. And then at the end of the shot, it finally came around. You actually saw Bard and his boat and the front of Lake Town. So we decided it was just easier just to replace it all with digital.
What we proposed was, could we even do an alternate camera? Could we go higher and wider with the city? Could we really get a chance to see the entire structure?
It was our first look at Lake Town, so we wanted to be able to really get a good look at everything, to see the expanse of Lake Town, because in this movie, you don't really see how big Lake Town is except for a couple shots. So it really had to show that off.
The critical thing that we always wanted to do is to really sell the idea of it being an island, and that causeway is working quite well. RKO Radio Lake Town Radio Lake Town coming in. We've got a special on fish down at the market today.
You know, with the crew that's working on Lake Town, part of the appeal of working on it was knowing what happens in the books, knowing what happens to Lake Town. That we're going to build this gigantic city, and we know what Smaug's going to do to it. So the appeal of it is not just this film, but it's the next film as well.
Smaug's going to come and ruin it all, which is a shame, really, because it's been... it's probably been the set I've worked on the most since I've arrived, and so I've become quite fond of it. Well, it is Bard's home, too, you know? No, it's been a very special place to work on, especially when you think you are working in a car park that's been flooded. It's just brilliant.
In the beginning, a project like this, there's absolutely nothing. There's a book, and there's a very ambitious director. But to put all that into a world where there's absolutely nothing that exists is a huge job.
The sharing of knowledge was incredible, and I don't think there was a single person on the production who didn't feel like they were part of something really special.
It's more than a job, you know? It's playtime. It's emotional, just working here. There's nowhere else I'd rather be.
People doing the steel work, you know, the carpenters, the sculptors, the painters, you know, this extraordinary legion of people. And then exactly the same thing digitally, except, you know, they're not using hammers and brushes. They're all in front of their computers. They're doing exactly the same thing. They're constructing and sculpting and texturing and painting, you know.
They work magic, those people. They really do. I was continually astonished, and I still am when I see the movie. I'm still flabbergasted by the magnificence of the different parts of Middle-earth that they've created.
I'm just astounded by what we were able to achieve by taking this really proactive attitude and going for it and getting the finishes, getting the detail, making it feel as real as it possibly could.
And I mean, that's one of the great pleasures of doing this job, is when you go into this play world of the imagination and you see how somebody else has created this so entirely and perfectly, just so that you can make a film in it, you know?
And cut. Great. Thank you very much.
What is Gandhi's theme song?
It was a fellowship theme. How did the fellowship theme go?
Anybody know the tune, the fellowship tune?
Hey, Andrew, Andrew, what was the fellowship theme?
What?
You should be humming that to yourself as you walk in here.
To the bridge of Coswell.
There have been a few times in the past decades where film music has really broken through into the popular consciousness. And I think Howard Shore's work on the Middle-earth films is a very rare and very special thing.
Throughout the Middle-earth series, beginning with The Lord of the Rings and now continuing into The Hobbit, Howard Shore's score sort of hit the zeitgeist at the right time. It's emotional.
They will look for his coming from the White Tower, but he will not return.
The last of our kin.
It's dramatic. And it's got a lot of heart. And I think will continue to be some of the best known scores in cinema going forward for decades.
Setting out to create The Hobbit, we wanted to bring this world into the world that we had already established with Lord of the Rings.
The first Hobbit movie, An Unexpected Journey, covered a lot of very familiar territory with Hobbiton and the Hobbits and the Ring and Gollum and Rivendell, which all required us to reprise themes. I mean, we didn't want to write a new Rivendell theme. It was a great score, but the most exciting thing really about the second movie is that, you know, there was hardly any old themes in it. Our journey goes into uncharted new territory. And for the first time in the Hobbit trilogy, Howard was able to write a brand new score from start to finish. This is the Howard Shore score that I was certainly waiting for.
Tolkien's writing is very complex, probably the most complex fantasy world ever created. It filled up with so many ideas of places and cultures. So you needed all of these themes for clarity, for storytelling.
A very big component of Howard's score is the use of the themes to anchor you and remind you of a character and where you are in the story.
I think the score for film 2 has more new themes than we've had in a single film before, even in the original trilogy. Howard wrote 19 themes, and all of those were approved by Peter before he was scoring anything to picture.
Should we orchestrate this? Because I think it's good to go. The way that we work with Howard is that he starts to generate new themes. If we want a new theme, a new character, you know, we're going to a new place. He generates those themes without any picture. He literally writes a 1.5 minute synth mock-up. Once that theme exists and everybody's happy with it, then it's so easy to then take that theme and apply it to the different scenes that you want to use it.
Usually I spend a few months just writing the thematic ideas, and I start with Tolkien's writings. The words, to me, always inherently have everything I need to get started.
The lost path. No other idea would come into Bilbo's tired head. He just sat, staring in front of him at the endless trees.
And here we have 3 really good screenwriters, so you take away a lot from the screenplay.
If this is to end in fire, then we will all burn together.
Looking at beautiful conceptual drawings of Alan Lee and John Howe is a great source of inspiration. And I like to visit the set. Seeing the actual creations of Richard Taylor and Weta Workshop, seeing the actual designs brought to life in the studio, see the director in action.
So Steve, you've got to go in better, and you have to sort of get across to here.
Peter describing an image in the green screen can be enlightening.
He spins around on you, and this huge big body of the dragon kind of slithering its way between one wall and the other.
But having said all that, sometimes I like to just dream of it on my own. It's a little bit like Oz, you know, you don't want to take a peek behind the curtain and see how everything's being done. You want to stay in the magic of it. I like to write the themes first and then go into the scoring process, so the themes and the motifs are fully formed.
In the past with these films, what has happened is that Howard would write the music, he orchestrates the music, delivers the final scores to the players, and is up there conducting the LPO in London.
Touch it once and then let it decay.
On The Lord of the Rings, we were able to go to London from New Zealand and go to Abbey Road. You know, I should sit in on every single music recording session.
He would spend the entire scoring time in London so that he could be on the stage helping shape the performance of the music.
I just wondered if there was any way the scene could start after the shot of Gollum when we're back on Frodo again, because it goes Frodo, Gollum, Frodo.
We thought we were going to be able to go to London when we did the first Hobbit movie.
Yeah, Mr. Gandalf, can't you do something about this deluge?
But we just couldn't figure out how to leave the country for 6 weeks. The post-production in New Zealand was so intense that we just couldn't get there. I think we want to lower everything for the Goblin King's line so it really stands out.
Peter's a guide for not just music, but for everything.
Do you want one shot of the dwarves running towards us?
Any process that Peter Jackson would be away from, technical or creative decisions.
That last wag springs off a bit lightweight, that one there.
Those processes would suffer.
It would be good if it's a violent shot.
Well, the same thing happened for us because he wasn't able to come to London.
And it was a big struggle because it meant that he wasn't able to help in shaping the score in the way he had on the original trilogy.
So getting into film 2, we now knew that we're not going to get Peter to come to London. So how do we do it? How do we take the mountain to Mohammed?
So this time on the Desolation of Smaug, we brought the scoring to New Zealand. We did that in the Wellington Town Hall with the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra.
We also built a system and a team so that Howard could stay in New York, where he lives and works, and really focus on the one thing that nobody else can do, and that is compose. Breaking the tasks down so that James Sizemore and Conrad Pope would do the orchestrations.
Howard is usually composing 2 minutes of new music each day, and we develop the sounds and textures under his supervision.
It's quite a team effort, really. So it kind of worked like that from me to James to Conrad, and then Conrad conducting.
And what an orchestrator can do is take a composer's shorthand and help him determine the part each instrument in the ensemble will play. This is a massive task because each bar is so contained with so much information of dynamics, how loud you play, how long you play, whether or not it's staccato, marcato, it's all these things that are just overwhelming, the amount of information. And that's one bar. And these pieces of music that Howard has written will have 400 bars in them.
This is an example of one violin part from one cue we prepared for the Hobbit film.
We don't get to see the parts ahead of time. We arrive and it's just on our music stand.
This is what we get, and then we start reading, and you know, sometimes it's a bit busier, but that's just what we do.
There's no real rehearsal. We just come in and we do our job, which is to play everything perfectly first time.
Here we go. 4 into 95. Recording.
Here lies our path through Mirkwood.
Mirkwood, it's a forest that's kind of hallucinogenic almost. You get lost in this tangle of trees and fungus. And the music can actually get inside the heads of the characters more effectively than just about anything.
Mirkwood definitely had a clear, identifiable tune to it.
It's a very simple, straightforward line that tends to get lost in the texture, but there's this recurring idea. And then they wander off the path and they lose that theme and they lose that clarity and everything becomes jumbled and hypnotic.
That music was made to make you feel ill. To make you feel a bit woozy.
Howard has a very impressive ability to really shape the sound using some aleatoric methods in the music.
Aleatoric, in a very rough sense, boils down to there being some improvised element of the music that creates this very bizarre but beautiful texture.
We owe a great debt to the composers of the 50s, the Polish avant-garde, really, which is where it really became a more well-known technique.
Modern composers like Penderecki that really stress that type of writing.
Essentially, the players have a box with some notes in it. They can play any of those notes in any order, in any rhythm they want. And they don't have to play them all. They can pick a few, they can pick one. But the main thing is to get some randomness in it.
It's almost like a scene from Dante's Hell. You could actually hear the tormenting of the various souls, that human element that we bring to it.
A lot of the work to create the sense of what a trippy kind of experience that the dwarves are going through was obviously going to be done through sound.
Just do like various strokes or whatever you do on the waterphone, whatever it is you do to that thing.
We wanted to invoke some sound of things falling off the trees and things slipping out of your mind.
The orchestra could just come up with some, well, not sound effects, but almost like musical sound effects. Stringed instruments being played in ways they shouldn't be played. A whole lot of different strange percussion sound, bowed cymbals.
The name for this is random stuff.
And fuse it together into what is Mirkwood.
Further on a Mirkwood is the Woodland Realm, which is the elvish kingdom of Thranduil.
When the woodland elves are introduced, there has to be a little bit of cohesiveness and continuity to tie them together with all the other elf cultures. We already have the Lothlorien elves, we have the Rivendell elves.
Rivendell has had its own structure, its own harmonic language. It was based around a much more formal type of system of harmony.
And then you move over to Lothlorien, which sounds slightly Arabic, if you will. But now you have this whole new elf culture, which has their own heritage behind it.
When you get to the Woodland Realm, things start to get a little bit more complex in terms of, are these friends, are these foes?
I offer you my help.
They're sort of both light and dark at the same time, and I think the theme actually does represent that and show that.
do not think you would allow your son to pledge himself to a lowly sylvan elf.
Tauriel is one of the few elf characters to have her own theme.
Where other elf royalty didn't have thematic music specifically created for them, like Elrond, Galadriel. They have hints of their culture connected to them. But Tauriel has her own motifs.
Her theme sort of draws on a little figure that you often hear at the end of the theme for the Woodland Realm. So that is very similar to the same idea.
Music describes her movement and how fluid it was.
One of my favorite musical themes in these films so far is Kili and Tauriel's theme. It's absolutely beautiful.
This theme was based on the concept of duality. In the beginning, you have a duet for flute and oboe. You know, two different voices conversing.
She worries. She thinks I'm reckless.
Are you?
Because you basically have a relationship theme here that's between two cultures that don't traditionally go together.
This connection that forms between the two of them, it's doomed from the beginning, but it's no less beautiful for being doomed. One of the favourite things that I get to do working on these films is to work with Howard Shore, writing lyrics for Howard when he needs choir.
It is Merith and Gilith, the feast of starlight. All light is sacred to the Eldar, but wood elves love best the light of the stars.
When she speaks about how elves love all light, above all else they love starlight, and the notion that this young sylvan elf, whose world has probably been confined by this dark woodland and who has never really ever ventured out into the world, has yet in a way spiritually gone beyond the confines of the world and walked, as she says,
I have walked there sometimes, beyond the forest and up into the night.
That became the theme of the song, and then we gave it to David Salo, who does all our translations.
The chorus is two different languages. You have an Elvish language, and you have Húsdúl, the Dwarvish language, kind of going back and forth, call and response.
This soprano with the London Voices, Grace, who sang that, I'd have to say one of the best sopranos I've ever heard. She did an amazing, amazing job.
And then by the time we actually hear that Tauriel and Kili theme develop when Tauriel heals Kili at the end of the film, it's so much more powerful because it's kind of had the chance to grow and mature along with those characters.
It's like a fragile thing, the way they connect. And I think Howard just perfectly captured that with the theme that he wrote.
At its heart, you're using themic material that is telling the story.
Do you think she could have loved me?
The music is really an emotional guide, and Howard's scores have been a big part of the success and the connection that the audience has with these films. Journey on the Hobbit's score has been different for a number of reasons, and for film 2, we knew we're not going to get Peter to come to London. So we decided that we would launch a scoring adventure, if you will, in Wellington Town Hall.
Now, this building is exactly 100 years old, and it's an auditorium built before anybody recorded sound. It's built for live performance, and as such, the acoustics are incredibly good.
Soon after it was opened, it was rated as one of the top 10 auditoriums in the world. The town hall hosted Queen Elizabeth II on her inauguration tour when she first visited New Zealand. Later in its history, the first time New Zealanders got to hear the Beatles live in concert was at the Wellington Town Hall in 1964.
The acoustics in the town hall are quite impressive. But the problem is it's not a dedicated recording facility. And I was very nervous about that because there's a lot of equipment that we need in order to do this properly.
Today is day 1 of our pack-in for recording into the town hall. We're still kind of working out what needs to go where and how we're going to have it, because essentially we're building a studio inside this big, beautiful building. Hopefully, in a few days, we would have totally worked it out.
Look at all this gear behind over here. The town hall has got a fantastic acoustic, and so we want to be able to capture the sound of the orchestra in the room. But the way that we are setting it up is really studio quality, so we're hoping to get the best of both worlds.
The floor layout of the town hall was a similar space to Abbey Road in London. Before he came out here, Pete measured everything out at Abbey Road and then overlaid that orchestra setup into the CAD drawings that the NZSO had sent us for the town hall. And then that became essentially this duplicate setup of what he had done in Studio One at Abbey Road.
Pete Cobbin basically set it up with an array of incredible old microphones, some of them 50 or 60 years old.
We've got some classic M50 Neumann microphones, and they're a good 60 years old, and they've got a fantastic warm coloration.
He's got microphones in all sorts of interesting little places, recording not just the orchestra, he's recording like the reverb and the echo and the decay that a place like this actually gives you.
You can just hear, if you think of the sound going up to the ceiling and then back down, you can write bigger music, more epic music, more music like Richard Strauss, because this hall can be filled with immense sound.
We actually recorded a large section of the Fellowship of the Ring score here back in 2001 with the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra.
It's just an honor to be working with you. We started with the New Zealand Symphony on the Mines of Moria. They were the first orchestra that recorded music for Lord of the Rings. It was a piece that we took to Cannes. It was kind of a teaser reel kind of thing.
Greetings from New Zealand. I'd like to introduce you to my friend and passenger, Peter Jackson.
Thank you, Gandalf. Thank you. I'd like to welcome you all to the special screening of some footage from the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
New Line wanted to roll out Fellowship of the Ring in a big way at the Cannes Film Festival in May of 2001, and it was decided that they would show an entire sequence for the film.
Frodo. Orcs.
We were a long way from doing any music scoring, but we needed to do this section.
So they brought Howard down there, and this is why the films were still very much in production. So everything sort of needed to be down in New Zealand. There was no time for anyone to go anywhere else.
Actually, tomorrow I go out and shoot some more of the film. So it's a kind of interesting place to be at the moment. You don't know whether you're Arthur or Martha.
The Cannes Film Festival presentation was critical. There was no guarantee that this series was going to be a success. And if it hadn't been, even though we shot all 3 films, we would have downscaled our post-production efforts on film 2 and 3. So there was a lot riding on it.
It was the proof of concept for the film, but it also was for the music. Howard wasn't known as someone that had tackled this sort of filmmaking before. So to be able to introduce that to the world, both cinematically and musically, it was just hugely important.
Hopefully they'll get some sort of idea of the sheer scope and depth and passion that we have for these movies.
Even just showing the 24 minutes that we showed after 4 years of work, it feels a bit like premiere, and everybody has been so kind in comments of what they saw that I think it's a good cause for celebration, so we're very happy.
It played terrifically at Cannes, and we felt, okay, we've got a winner here. Now we just have to finish it.
It was before the actual score was due to be recorded in the UK, so we thought it might get replaced eventually before the film was finished, but it wasn't the case. The New Zealand Symphony Orchestra played so brilliantly, and this room sounded so fantastic that it was never replaced, and that's what you're hearing in the movie.
The 26 minutes that we recorded very much became the sound. And in a way, that kind of set the mood for that film and for pieces that came after it.
A number of the players had been with us when we did The Mines of Moria, so it was a little bit of a homecoming.
Yeah, I was part of the first Lord of the Rings movie. Of course, I was a bit younger, like we all were, but it was really exciting, something I had never done before.
To be involved in such a huge film score, Oscar-winning score, I was just having the best time of my life with that.
To now go full circle after so many years and be back playing his music with another wonderful conductor, Conrad Pope, it's a great combination.
So, welcome back.
This is a huge deal for the Interdisso. Obviously, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit is presenting New Zealand to the rest of the world. I mean, this is Middle-earth. We've been wanting to do this recording for a very long time. So we're very glad it's gone there and back again. It's now back in New Zealand.
The New Zealand Orchestra was truly impressive, and I gotta say, the sound that came out of there was really amazing.
I always thought it'd be great to be able to bring it home and let them get their teeth around an entire score this time rather than just a 20-minute section.
It's really different recording to performing. Part of the difference is that in a recording, it goes on for a whole day. So a concert would never go on for a whole day. You have to keep your energy strong and concentrated throughout many more hours.
I find this, in a way, more challenging and more stimulating than playing a Bruckner symphony.
It is very different to what we normally would do in a symphony concert, for example. We need to be directed by the conductor, this, in this case, conductor and orchestrator.
Just going to play this and try to catch the various tempo changes with the click. Then we'll come back and dissect it.
Conrad Pope is pretty much the top orchestrator in town, and he brings such a kind of an infectious joy.
He's so sort of laid back and chilled out. He sort of doesn't at all suit the stereotype of a conductor.
And we're locking the doors.
A good conductor is not someone who makes a performance. A good conductor is someone who actually releases a performance. Not dictate it, not command it, perhaps guide it, but know that his real role is to honor their artistry and to make it possible for all the instrumentalists here to give their best.
What is this place? This Master Buggins is the world of men.
The Lake Town theme was about this town that once had glory. now has faded into the past because of its trials and tribulations with a dragon.
We wanted to base the Lake Town theme almost like a smuggler's shanty town, something like out of, England in the 1700s at the Cornwall coast.
17th century pirates, smugglers. It has that feeling to me of this folk piece that may have been 100 or a couple hundred years old.
Folk songs tend to have that simple, repetitive structure. It has that dun, da, da, dun, da, da, da. It almost felt like a work song.
It probably relates more to Rohan in the folk aspect of it. But Rohan had the hardanger. It had this northern European sound. Whereas Lake Town does feel more like England.
Get me a brandy.
The mayor and his lackey really have this sort of tainted air of decay and corruption.
The master of Lake Town has got this little theme which is played on a clavichord.
Howard asked for clavichord, and but in the demo he sent it was a harpsichord sample. Pete really liked the sound of the demo, and I was really concerned that we would go and record the clavichord, and Pete would be wondering what it was and what happened to the sound in the demo that he had really liked.
They're both keyboard instruments with metal strings inside. Clavichord is struck with little metal blades, which gives it a sort of dingier tone. Whereas a harpsichord plucks its strings as it's played, which gives it a nice, brilliant type of sound.
So we had to decide, would we do a harpsichord or a clavichord? So we decided to get both down to the town hall and try them.
When we actually came around to review it for Pete, Fran actually immediately said, well, it's obvious which one we have to go to. And to us, it was all obvious, but we weren't sure whether her obvious was the same that was obvious to us. And then there was this pause. It was almost deliberate, I think, that she just waited like 10 seconds or so before she actually said which one, but it was the clavichord.
I think we can go to the next spot, 41.
The score that we receive at the beginning of each session, it's really just the starting point for the music that we'll be recording that day. There are so many changes that are made.
I find myself at a disadvantage when I'm sitting in the room trying to give notes. Don't know anything about bars and octaves and semitones, and it's all kind of Latin nonsense to me, really, but I listen to the music and I imagine dramatically, how it's got to work within the framework of the film.
Any notes?
Yeah, I had a couple of little notes there, just a couple of small ones. I just wondered if the very first notes are a bit too, I don't know, sort of lacking tension or lacking an edge.
When it comes to music, he doesn't have the musical terminology, but if he explains the story and you understand what he's trying to do with the story, that pretty much explains everything that needs to happen from a music perspective.
I will translate what the director says and know immediately, because of my orchestrational skills, this, and this. Let's try it.
Flutes, all of you take piccolos. With your piccolos and stuff, just do rips up to the highest possible note.
Let's try that, yeah.
Let's see if this works.
is it a little too psycho?
Well, it's about as psycho as you can get.
Yeah.
Without being psycho.
It's the flutes is what's doing the psycho stuff.
No, I think it's a bit too. It's a wee bit too much, I think.
Hey, Conrad. We've gone too far with the flutes. I think what Pete's looking for is if we put the flutes back to what they have, and I don't know if we can have anything playing this part an octave up from what the top currently is. If there are more complex changes to the music, we actually need to get new parts printed.
Rick, could you give the trumpets, basically the clarinet part, from bars 26 through 34?
At Conrad's request, he wanted to add the trumpets into a section of music that didn't have trumpets previously, and he wanted them to play what the clarinets were playing. So I'm creating a new part for the trumpets, and then I'll print it and pass it out to the players.
We could give a reasonably complex change and within a few minutes actually have new parts out to the players that the change affected.
It's amazing to me how Conrad's mind can perceive the colors he wants by subtracting instruments or adding instruments.
8 into 26, please.
And so those have to be done on the spot, and we were able to do that because of the artistry of the orchestra, their attentiveness, and their willingness to sort of play it by ear.
It's got much more of a kind of a peril to it, much more jeopardy to it, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's fine.
There'll just be a few notes in a minute, Conrad.
Sometimes things are happening in the control room that they're making film decisions that we're not party to, and we have to sit and wait until they're finished.
That can sometimes be a little alienating for an orchestra. So it's really important that the conductor is the link between what he knows he needs to deliver for the control room and the filmmakers and keeping the orchestra engaged.
Is this a Pro Tool thing?
Yep.
How much longer have we got? Because I can tell all my jokes.
You might have time for another joke.
My country, to join the musicians union, they don't ask you to play an instrument. They first say, "Can you tell time?" Though I did discover a new drink here that I've never heard of. Red Bull and vodka. It's called the Conductor. No.
With the jokes, not that I'm looking for a second career, because if I did, I'd definitely fail at that one. My goal is to keep everyone engaged.
So when we actually come back to them, they're all ready to go and they're focused.
So this viola player in the Boston Symphony couldn't stand Arthur Fiedler. Just hated him.
Here he comes.
Sometimes he kind of gets halfway through a joke and then the control room steps in and we don't get to hear the end of it.
So the Pops were playing this arrangement.
We're ready now.
I think we got about 3 more words each time we tried to tell it. And finally, we got to the punchline.
First piece up after intermission, and it was going to be the Mexican hat dance. So Fiedler walks out on stage, and he knows that one of the viola players that hated him had on a brimmed Mexican hat. And he looked at the guy and he said, "Take that off." The guy said, "No." He said, "I'm going to come down there and take it off you." Come ahead. And in mid-thing, Fiedler jumps off the podium because he just is so infuriated after about 32 bars and goes after the guy, and they start to wrestle, and the audience goes wild. They think, this is the best show ever.
So we're definitely ready now.
Okay. And hey, could we do that like in about 20 minutes? The orchestras do a break.
Sure.
Yes, there you go. Thank you.
And then after a 20-minute break, I came back, and I'd just gotten all these changes from Peter, and I had so much to dictate to the orchestra. And I came up and I raced up to the podium here and I had my head just buried. And so somebody said, "The violas have a question. The violas have a question." I go, fine, violas have a question. And I looked up. We did a lot of very hard work, very tough work requiring a lot of concentration. but we sort of never lost sense of also just having a good time.
Excellent. Suddenly, it's all been elevated in my mind. Are we just marking time till Pete gets here?
Yes.
Okay, we'll just try this and.
Peter's schedule is a complex tap dance of his time. Every day consists of a little bit of everything, from going to scoring sessions, to visual effects reviews, to recording ADR, to sound mixing.
I thought the sound of going in and out of the thing could be a little bit more accentuated.
Having a score right there in New Zealand, it was beneficial for all. Peter's time could be used wisely.
Yeah, I bet. He's all over the place. You know, he almost needs one of those segways to cruise around.
Of course, what always happens with the music recording is that it's at the most frantic time of the movie-making process. It's right in the middle of post-production.
And getting the fry pan, and then you go to the guy with the mop getting whacked.
So everything funnels together into this very compressed 6-8 week window.
That's the sort of water you want to go for, because you believe that it's deep enough.
Pete, they're ready for you downstairs.
Okay.
I see his schedule, and I just think, well, I've got it easy. But he has a tremendous ability to be focused on whatever task is in front of him.
Even though I'm busy, I love being here. I love the music. Just having it playing while I'm dealing with all this stuff is actually a little different, which is nice. A bit of soft, gentle musical accompaniment.
Music is such a heartbeat, a sort of a pulse of the movie. I mean, visual effects, design, production, that's all okay, but I don't know what's more important than music in some respects. The Dwarven themes had to have a nobility, they had to have a sadness, they had to have a sense of a faded sort of empire.
It kind of takes back to what I had thought about and what I had created in Lord of the Rings for the Dwarf Kingdom.
Howard Shore created the sound of Dwarvish culture, the sound of ruined grandeur, something that was once beautiful and proud and great, but has sort of been worn away by the horrors that have befallen it. In The Hobbit, the House of Durin theme has a very similar feel to it.
It's interesting how, with the different dwarf themes, House of Durin has become so predominant, very important piece. And House of Durin kind of takes back to the history of the dwarves and their lineage. And Thorin's theme grew out of the House of Durin.
What the interesting thing is when you take that theme and you repurpose it in different ways.
With Thorin's theme, you begin with a scene that's really kind of before any of the quest has begun. You see Thorin and you hear this very shadowy version of his theme. It's not quite put together yet. The goals of that character are a little bit lost. So you see him go from discovering his quest to realizing his quest, and the music follows it.
And then, of course, we have the Erebor theme. You hear that piece and you know where you are.
And Erebor is where we get, of course, to meet a rather large dragon.
Smaug's theme had to accomplish a lot musically. I mean, this is a much more epic, very sinister, cunning, and powerful character.
Do you now?
I think Smaug required a sound and a texture different from the rest of the film.
There's one Smaug melody that's very long, it takes a long time to develop, and the other one can be done pretty quickly, just with a few notes. You can say Smaug pretty quick.
You have the basic form here. The ascending version is a little bit longer, but built on the same pitches.
I think that Smaug melody is too sort of comfortable sounding. Is there a way that we can just make it nastier?
You just want creepier?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the melody part. It's just a little too musical and too nice. We wanted something that would play this sort of paranoid, psychotic feel.
And so rather than sort of bend the theme in a way, I thought, well, you know, what we should do is probably just do something that you never hear, that's very hard actually for them to do, which is various people doing their own interpretation and intonation. Just all over the place. And ugly. Lots of pressure. Easy. Right near the bridge. Pretend you're taking an audition where you don't want the job.
And what they were all doing is they were all playing slightly detuned, but all differently.
Which is very hard because they've all learned to play in tune.
Wow.
Outstanding! Did you guys like
Conrad, that's wicked.
Smaug is somebody who literally is a psychopath. And music is a wonderful secret weapon. It's like the sort of Smaug melody you'd hear with a dentist trying to drill a root canal into your tooth sort of thing, just kind of, something that gets into your head, you know?
Watch it destroy him. Watch it corrupt his heart and drive him mad.
Well, that wasn't too bad, was it?
And by the time we get the gamelan and everything else in here, it's going to be just unbelievable.
In Smaug's theme, we use Eastern elements of the gamelan.
Gamelan's a family of instruments from Indonesia. It includes all sorts of different sounds, deep gongs, metalophones, xylophones, a lot of pitched metal instruments. It's very tied into all aspects of Indonesian culture. It was used for ceremonies, used for dances, used for puppet plays. And the legend behind it was that it was designed by this god that lived high up upon a mountain. So you have that idea of somebody up in their mountain using this sound to sort of relate to the other gods around.
You wanted to reveal Smaug as a force from the East, something very exotic, and it was a way to bring in the Eastern culture into Smaug.
There's a gamelan orchestra at the university, and I was charged with the task of going up to investigate, record some ideas, incorporate those colours and those textures with the conventional Western score.
The concept of the gamelan is the togetherness. We're playing it together.
We did a lot of things that could be used in film composition to make layers of texture and some things for the composer to use.
I mean, it's just an exotic sound. And so I would play around with different melodic parts that are tonally written in scales that evoke, you know, pseudo-evoke the East, really.
And most of it is for the scene where Bilbo's going into the cave with all the coins and the gold and sneaking around.
I remember there were spots where we featured it. I just remember pushing up on the fader because we liked the sound. It's a good compliment to a lot of the action. You'll hear little tingly, crazy sounds. They almost sound like the jewels, but they're not. They're percussive little hits that accent the stillness of that room and just the quietness.
What's that?
And all that blended together with the orchestra gets a really, really interesting colour.
While Smaug's theme dominates that last section of the picture, there is a battle going on with the dwarves and Smaug. But if you look at it from a purely musical aspect, there's a battle of themes.
Hello from New York. James and Howard here.
Hi. And suddenly these guys drop buckets on his head. So now Smaug is buying them time, and now the gold starts to go down this channel. So maybe we're almost playing Thorin's plan now. And it lifts, and now Smaug's coming at him.
The tide turns, it's going with our guys, now it's going against our guys. It's like watching a high-speed tennis match.
From a filmmaking point of view, there's so much subtle stuff that you can do that unconsciously kind of supports the story that you're telling. And now this is the culmination of Thorin's plan. When the statue melts, it's a triumphant moment for Thorin, and that theme's playing. For a moment, we think that Smaug is gone. And suddenly, Smaug bursts out of the gold. And then it changes into Smaug's theme.
The Smaug music dominates right to the very end, and you're left with a sense of, it seems like Smaug's victorious.
We're here on our last day of scoring, and we're actually recording a section of the film right now that isn't really finished. So it's very hard because we're trying to record a piece of music for a section of film that doesn't exist, and we have kind of a guide of it.
There will be visual effects shots that are finished at the very last minute. And so if you don't have a CGI dragon fighting in the forges, because you literally just haven't done that yet, you don't know how long it's going to be. You don't know whether you're talking about a 3-second shot, 5-second shot. So what you tend to do then is you must give yourself flexibility. And the best way to do that was to record the orchestra in sections.
What we would like to do is when we record this section, we're going to split it out, do it in layers. We're recording all those parts of this music separately so that as the picture changes, we'll be able to edit the music and manipulate the music and sort of rearrange it to work well with the new picture.
Yeah, so we could do the woodwinds first, please.
Woodwinds, you're up.
You know, you hear the orchestra playing together all the time, and you hear how good it sounds, and it's a fantastic sound. But then we suddenly started breaking the orchestra up, and then you realize that every individual section is phenomenal.
Percussion, thanks.
Horns, please. Strings.
The Forges was also obviously a climax, so you've got the full orchestra playing, and you've got, you know, it's got to be very, very exciting. And you know, you put all that together, and it sounds exactly like what Howard wrote.
Thank you very much. You've all been amazing.
So thank you ever so much.
Thank you. No, I've just come to say that we thought we might want to do the whole score again, one instrument at a time. Hey, folks, just want to thank you very, very much. It's been fantastic. It's I've looked forward every day. I've looked forward to coming in here and sitting and hearing it all. It's just been terrific, and you've done us proud, honestly. Done New Zealand proud too. So congratulations, and thank you so much for all the incredible focus, and you've made our movie sound so incredibly good. Thank you.
There's got to be great pride from the orchestra to know that they played this score. They brought their own personalities. It's got a distinctive sound. I must say, I'm proud. If you think of film score as being, in a way, the emotional heart, because you can close your eyes, but you can never close your ears, even in the movies.
Well, film is a very collaborative medium. It's really a team, a group. There's a lot of great artists who work on a film. Great engineers, the musicians that I've worked with in England, musicians we've worked with in Wellington that have contributed so enormously. And I always thought that to make good films, you have to have this really good sense of collaboration. You have to have this balance between the arts and all the different disciplines that are required to make a film.
Well, of course, everybody wants to know, how does it end? All I can tell you is we've started working earnestly on the third film.
And the third part is interesting because it's really the third of 6. So you're really writing a piece between 2 and 4, and that's an interesting place. So it's not really a closure, really. It's really an ending and a beginning.
I'm very much wanting it to be 6 movies that ultimately become a grand story that you can see from beginning to end. Music unites the film, and ultimately it's going to unite the entire 6 films as well.
And now I must take my pencil to paper and write a new score. Thank you all for listening.